English made easy. Hey guys, feeling overwhelmed by the fast pace of Wordly Wise 3000? I've been there, too. Welcome to your 40-minute slow listening sanctuary. We've tuned every sentence to the classic slow English standard, giving your brain the perfect window to process and truly master every word. I'm your 1 degree north companion. Ready? Let's begin. Book 4. Lesson 13. All right, let's start with a thought experiment. Just imagine for a second that your entire world, your safety, your very existence, depends on a simple piece of furniture, a bookshelf. Imagine that constant, quiet fear that a single push, one curious glance, could unravel everything. Well, that feeling, that was the day-in, day-out reality for a young girl whose voice would end up echoing through generations. This is the story of that bookshelf, the world hidden behind it, and the unbelievable courage found in a secret diary. And here she is. This is Anne Frank, a girl full of life, full of dreams. But when she was only 11 years old, a wave of terror swept over her home. Her weapon to fight back wasn't a sword or a gun, it was a diary and a pen. So, to really understand her courage, we first have to understand her prison, this hidden world tucked away, silent, secret, right in the heart of a bustling city. It all started in 1940 when Hitler's armies invaded Holland. The Frank family was Jewish, and under Nazi rule, well, that was basically a death sentence. Their only shot at survival was to disappear, and they did, into a space they called the Achterhuis, or the secret annex, just a small set of rooms concealed behind a revolving bookshelf in Mr. Frank's office. So, what was driving all this terror? It really came down to the ideology of a fanatic. You know, someone whose belief is so extreme that it becomes all-consuming and totally destructive. This fanaticism is what fueled the hatred that forced families just like the Franks, to abandon their lives and hide in the shadows. And it was in this hidden space, completely cut off from the world, that Anne discovered her most powerful tool for survival. It was a diary she named Kitty, and it became her way of pushing back against that crushing, endless silence. Life in the annex was, as Anne herself put it, dreary, just sad, gloomy, and monotonous. The days just blurred into one another in those cramped rooms, with the constant threat of being discovered hanging right over their heads. I mean, think about it, no fresh air, no sunlight, just the same four walls day after day after day. You can just imagine how easy it would have been to feel dejected in a situation like that, completely discouraged, spirits just crushed. And, for sure, had those moments. Who wouldn't? But the thing that's so incredible is that no matter how dejected she felt, she never, ever stopped writing. You know, the word itself is pretty interesting. Dejected actually comes from this Latin root jacere, which means to throw. So, to feel dejected literally means to feel like your spirit has been thrown down, cast aside. And there, in that dreary annex, Anne just refused to let her spirit stay on the floor. She picked it right back up with her pen. So, how on earth did they survive emotionally? Well, it was a constant, daily battle between this overwhelming fear and this fragile but incredibly persistent flicker of hope. Danger was literally everywhere, in every single sound. I want you to just try and imagine it. You hear a door slam downstairs, heavy footsteps on the stairs, voices you don't recognize. For you and me, that's just background noise. For them, any one of those sounds could mean it was all over. They had to live in a way that would never, ever arouse suspicion. I mean, they couldn't even flush the toilet during the day because what if someone in the warehouse below heard the pipes? They might suspect people were hiding. And to suspect is to believe something, even without proof. For them, the slightest hint of suspicion could be fatal. In the end, it was a suspicion from an unknown source, a betrayal that remains a historical mystery, that led to their discovery. And yet, amidst all that constant terror, they clung to one single powerful idea, that their nightmare was only temporary, that it would only last for a limited time. They had to believe that one day the war would end and they'd be free again. Let's just pause on that for a second. Think about it. After months, which then turned into years of hiding, why was this belief that it was all temporary so crucial? What does hope really do for the human spirit when everything, absolutely everything, seems hopeless? But tragically, their hope for a temporary situation, well, it ran out of time. And this brings us to the diary's own journey, which is a story of both incredible heartbreak and unbelievable power. The timing is just, it's brutal when you see it laid out like this. They go into hiding in 1942. They survive for 2 long years. Then, in August 1944, their secret is betrayed. And just a few months later, May 1945, the war in Europe is over. They were so close. That right there is the very definition of tragic, a terrible, dreadful event that causes so much sadness, especially because of what could have been. The end of the war came just months too late for Anne and most of her family. It's just a heartbreaking reality. But Anne's voice, it wasn't silenced. After the raid, Miep Gies, one of the amazing people who helped them, she actually went back up to the annex and she found Anne's diary pages scattered all over the floor. It was her dependable friendship, her absolute refusal to let Anne's story just vanish, that saved this incredible voice for all of us. And because of those dependable friends, and because her father Otto miraculously survived, Anne's private thoughts became a public testimony. Her voice went on to change the world. And the impact it had, wow! It was like one object striking another. Her words hit the world with such a powerful effect. Her diary was translated into dozens and dozens of languages. It gave a human face to the millions who were murdered, making sure that we would never, ever forget. Otto Frank, the only one of the 8 people from the annex to survive the camps, he made it his life's mission to fulfill his daughter's dream. You see, late in their time in hiding, Anne had decided she wanted to publish her diary as a novel after the war. So her father didn't do it for fame or for money. He did it simply to share her story, her light, with the world that desperately, desperately needed to hear it. And that brings us to one last thought. We've talked about some heavy words, words like tragic, dejected, and dreary. But we've also seen words that scream hope and resilience. So here's a question for you. If you were going to build a monument to courage, which of the words we've talked about would you use to name it? Maybe the temporary terror? Or the dependable hope? Or something else entirely? It's a powerful thing to think about, and it just goes to show how a young girl's words can continue to have an incredible impact long after she wrote them down. Lesson 14.
You know, some stories feel like they're whispered on the wind, tales as old as the mountains themselves. Today, let's journey into the misty heart of Wales and uncover the legend of the silver lilies. It's a haunting story about music, magic, and a really heartbreaking sacrifice. Okay, so our story begins right here, beside this lonely lake, cradled by the ancient Welsh mountains. But this isn't just any ordinary water. If you look closer at its edges, you can see the silver shimmer that traces the shore. Well, that silver holds a secret, an echo of a legend that you can still feel today. At the very heart of this tale is a young boy named Hugh. Now, he wasn't a prince or some great warrior. He was just a simple boy living with his mother in a little cottage, tucked away on the green slopes of a mountain. And when we say humble, we mean their life was a simple one. It was all about modesty, not pride. Their small home, a lot like Hugh's gentle spirit, really didn't ask for much from the world. Every single morning, Hugh would guide his mother's cows to this beautiful green meadow right by the lake, and while they were grazing, he'd fill the air with music from his most prized possession, his harp. You know, in Wales, the harp is way more than just an instrument. Some people say it's the voice of the land itself. And then one day, just like any other, as he plucked a few simple chords on his harp, 3 notes sung together by the harp strings, that's it. That simple sound. Wow. It held this ancient power he could never have guessed. It's like that sound acted as a bridge, a connection between our world and another. Whose music was the key, and it had just unlocked a door hidden deep within the lake. And then, from the depths came this incredible sight. Lured out by the music, 6 magnificent cows with coats of pure, gleaming silver rose right out of the water. They gathered at the shore, their otherworldly eyes just fixed on Hugh, completely entranced by his music. Oh, you can just imagine his mother's shock, right? But that shock, it turned to joy pretty fast. Their fortune changed like overnight. She started boasting to all her neighbors about her magical cows and the rich, creamy milk they gave. Milk of an exceptional quality, she'd say, unlike any other. And it truly was exceptional, totally unusual, nothing like anything they had ever tasted. This magical milk brought them wealth and comfort, but with it, a little seed of greed began to grow. But, you know, this kind of magic, it's often fragile. Their good fortune was about to be put to the test because one day, one of those beautiful silver cows, it just stopped giving milk. And this is where the heart of the story just breaks right open. On one side, you have a tearful who, pleading for the creature's life, begging her to change her mind, and on the other, his mother, her heart hardened by their new wealth. She was obstinate, stubbornly refusing to relent, arguing they could not afford a cow that didn't produce. And that's what obstinate is, right? She was completely stubborn. Her mind was made up. The magic that had been this incredible gift was now just a business to her. And there was no room for compassion in her calculations. And to relent, to simply give in, well, that was something she just wasn't going to do. She refused to soften her stance, not for her son, and not for the magical creature that had blessed them. The decision was final. So the next morning, who was just filled with this deep melancholy, and this isn't just sadness, you know? It's a profound sorrow, a melancholy that settles deep in your bones. Fun fact: the word actually comes from an old belief that having too much black bile in your body caused deep sadness. As who led the cows up the mountain that day, knowing one was doomed, yeah, his heart was heavy with it. And finally, who just couldn't bear it any longer, in a single desperate act of defiance and love, who did the unthinkable. He took his cherished harp, the source of all the magic, the very voice of his soul, and he sacrificed it to the cold, silent water. And instantly, the moment the harp broke the surface, the magic shattered, as if they were all waking from a dream. All 6 silver cows turned as one, charged to the edge of the lake, and plunged right back into the depths they came from. It was a sudden, final, irreversible act. The magic was returning to the water, leaving who all alone on the shore, who never saw his silver cows again. All the wealth, all that exceptional milk, it was all gone in an instant. But the lake didn't forget, and in place of the cows, a new, quieter magic began to bloom. All of a sudden, masses of silver water lilies began to grow all along the fringes of the lake, the very same place where the cows had vanished into the water. They bloomed right on the fringe, the outer edge, that sacred boundary between the human world and the magical depths. The lilies became a permanent marker of where those two worlds had touched. And that brings us all the way back to our opening question. Why are the edges of this Welsh lake traced with silver? Because that's where the lilies grow. They are an eternal reminder of whose music, his love for the magical cows, and the heartbreaking sacrifice he made to protect one of them. So this story leaves us with a question to think about. If you possessed an exceptional gift, something truly special that could bring you fortune or fame, what would you be willing to sacrifice to protect what you truly cherish? It's a question about what things are really worth: magic, money, and love.
Lesson 15. Alright, let's dive into an American legend. We're talking about a man who walked the wilderness and literally changed the landscape with nothing more than a simple sack of seeds. This is the incredible story of John Chapman, but you probably know him better as Johnny Appleseed. So, to really get this story, you have to transport yourself back in time. We need to picture a world that is, well, completely different from ours. A time when the American frontier was this huge, wild, and pretty tough place to be. I mean, think about it. You can probably just walk over to your kitchen counter and grab an apple right now. It's such a common everyday thing for us. No, really, for most people living on the frontier back then, an apple was a super rare treat. The huge, sprawling American wilderness was basically an apple-free zone. And that's where our guy comes in, a man who looked at all this appleless land and didn't see a problem, he saw a purpose. His name was John Chapman. That's the real question, isn't it? It sounds almost impossible, but that's the journey we're about to take. It's a story of how one man's quiet mission completely reshaped a nation, one tiny seedling at a time. You know, to really understand someone, especially a figure from the past, it helps to look at the words people use to describe them. They're like little clues that paint a picture of the man who would become a legend. For instance, his clothes were often described as threadbare. Just imagine that, so worn out from constant walking that the fabric was thin and the threads were showing. Kind of like your favorite old t-shirt, but way more rugged. And that right there tells you so much about him. He just wasn't bothered by things like his appearance or owning a bunch of stuff. His mind was totally focused on his mission. Now, something he always had with him was a stout walking stick. When we say stout, we mean strong, thick, reliable, something that's not going to snap on you when you need it most. And get this, his most important tool, this sturdy walking stick, was cut from an apple tree. I mean, how perfect is that? It's like his whole life's purpose was right there in his hand, his constant companion on this lifelong journey. But maybe the most important word to understand John Chapman is content. It's that feeling of being completely satisfied, of being at peace with exactly what you have in the moment. This says it all, doesn't it? If night was falling and there wasn't a town or a house for miles, no big deal. He was perfectly content to just find a spot and sleep under the stars. The wilderness wasn't a scary place for him, it was home. So, picture him, with his worn-out clothes, his sturdy applewood stick, and a completely satisfied heart. He set off on a mission that would last for an unbelievable 40 years. And let's be clear, this wasn't just aimless wandering, throwing seeds around randomly. Oh no, he had a system, a practice. First, he'd get seeds from cider mills in New England. Then, he'd travel out to places like Ohio and Indiana, planting orchards before settlers even got there. And here's the brilliant part, he'd come back years later to take care of the trees. It was smart, dedicated work. So why do it? What was the big motivation? It was actually super simple. He just loved apples and wanted to share that joy. And here's a key detail, for people on the frontier, that joy often came in the form of hard cider. Water wasn't always safe to drink, but cider was. So the tart apples he planted were absolutely essential. And his work totally paid off. Can you just imagine his feeling of satisfaction, coming back to a place he'd been years before and seeing it exploding with blossoms? Or seeing the boughs, the big main branches, so heavy with fruit they were bending towards the earth? He literally watched the frontier change color because of what he'd done. But the legend of Johnny Appleseed is about so much more than just the trees. It's really about his incredible philosophy of kindness, something he lived and breathed every single day. See, he was a very religious man, a missionary whose faith taught him that all life was sacred. He didn't just dislike hurting things, he detested it. That's a powerful word. It means to hate something with your entire being. And that belief shaped everything, even what he ate. He was a vegetarian, which on the American frontier was almost unheard of. It all came from this deep respect he had for every living creature. You might be thinking, okay, so he was kind to animals, that's great, but his compassion went so much further than that. Just let this one sink in. There's a famous story that he once put out his own campfire because he saw mosquitoes flying into the flames and dying. He chose to sit in the cold and the dark rather than be the cause of death for even the smallest insects. That one single act tells you everything you need to know about the man's heart. So as you can imagine, this guy with his radical kindness and his life's work, he became a living legend. All across the frontier, people knew who he was and what he stood for. And that's how we got the name we all know him by today, Johnny Appleseed. It was just such an apt name, so fitting, so perfect. It's funny, the word apt actually has ancient roots meaning, to fit. There was just no better name for the man who was defined by the seeds he carried and the life he gave them. In the end, John Chapman's legacy isn't just about millions of apple trees. It's a powerful story about kindness, about quiet determination. His life was his message. And it leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? If you had 40 years to wander, what seeds, real or symbolic, would you decide to plant along your way? Lesson 16.
It soars through the sky, a perfect silhouette of power and freedom. For centuries, it's been this revered icon, a living symbol of strength. This is the story of the bald eagle and its incredible, almost unbelievable journey back from the very brink of extinction. I mean, think about it. For more than 200 years, this magnificent creature has been the symbol of America. You see its image stamped on our money, and it's the centerpiece of the nation's Great Seal. It really stands for the highest ideals of the country. But that just makes you wonder, right? If the bald eagle is such a perfect predator and this cherished national symbol, how on earth did it come so close to completely vanishing from our skies? Well, the answer is a fascinating story of an invisible threat and a gripping scientific mystery. To really understand the fall, you first got to appreciate the rise. So let's take a closer look at what makes this bird such a truly formidable hunter. You know, it's funny. The bald eagle isn't bald at all. That name actually comes from an Old English word, piebald, which just means having patches of white. It's all about that striking contrast between its brilliant white head and its dark brown body. It's a look that just commands respect. And this bird is, well, it's perfectly engineered for the hunt. It has unbelievably sharp vision to spot prey from way up high, a powerful hooked beak, and, of course, those famous talons. They're these sharp, incredibly strong claws that can just snatch a fish right out of the water. But you know, despite all this natural power, something went terribly wrong. This absolute master of the air began to just disappear. The situation got dire. 200 years after being named a national symbol, the bald eagle had been pushed right to the edge. Outside of Alaska, trying to find one in the wild had become a really rare and, frankly, a very worrying event. So, what was the menace responsible for this? What danger could possibly be so great it could threaten a bird this powerful? It wasn't another animal, that's for sure. The only real menace to the bald eagle was us, human beings. Now, this decline didn't happen overnight. For the scientists trying to figure it out, it started as this really disturbing puzzle, and at the center of it all was one very strange and very delicate clue. Yeah, back in the 1950s, it just became apparent to researchers that something was seriously wrong. The eagle population was dropping and fast, and nobody knew exactly why. This crisis prompted a much deeper investigation. And here was the crucial piece of the puzzle. Scientists who were watching eagle nests started to notice that the eggs, they were different. They were thin, they were brittle, and they were just dangerously fragile. So fragile they were easily broken. These fragile eggs were breaking long before the chicks could even hatch. An entire generation of eagles was literally being lost. But the mystery was still there. What in the world was making their eggshells so incredibly weak? The answer wasn't a new disease or some kind of super predator. It was a chemical, an invisible poison that had quietly worked its way right into the heart of the food chain. The mystery was finally cracked by a scientist named Rachel Carson. She was deeply concerned about the widespread use of chemical pesticides. Her groundbreaking 1962 book, Silent Spring, was like a bombshell. It revealed how these chemicals were silently poisoning the nation's wildlife, and it really sparked the modern environmental movement. So here's exactly how this poison worked its way up to the eagles. It all started with the widespread use of an insecticide called DDT on farms. Rain would wash it into lakes and streams, where it would begin to concentrate. Fish absorbed this poison from the water, and then, at the very top of the food chain, the bald eagles ate those fish. This process, called biomagnification, meant the DDT became most concentrated in the eagles, and it interfered with their ability to produce strong eggshells. Just a devastating chain reaction, but uncovering the truth, that was the first step toward a real solution. The story of the silent menace was about to become the story of a heroic comeback. You see, Rachel Carson's shocking discoveries prompted the public to stand up and demand action. Her science became this powerful rallying cry to save the national bird from a disaster that we had created. And the results of all that public action were swift. Just over a decade after Silent Spring came out, Congress passed a law that banned the use of DDT. Now, the recovery was slow, but it was steady. By 2007, the eagle was no longer even considered endangered, and the most recent estimates show a remarkable success. The result, 70,000. That was the estimated bald eagle population in North America by 2016. Think about that. A jump from near extinction to a thriving population, all because that silent menace was finally identified and stopped. Ultimately, the eagle's story isn't just about a bird, it's proof. It proves that when we actually understand the impact we're having, we have the power to reverse the damage and protect even the most fragile forms of life on this planet. So this leaves us with a final thought. The eagle became a symbol for a fight against an invisible poison, and it represents a battle that was won. So what's next? What is the environmental menace we face today that needs its own powerful symbol to prompt the kind of widespread action that saved the eagle?
Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. I'll see you in the next one.